Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Navigating Uncertainty, Preparing for the 2025 Enrollment Cliff. My name is Megan Kaufman-McCorkle. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Scoir, and I'll be your host today. Next, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists, provide an overview of the enrollment forecasts, and then kick off our discussion. Starting off, we have Thomas Baer, Vice President of Enrollment Management from Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. Then we have Karen Kristoff, Assistant Vice President and Dean of Admission from Colorado College. Bethany Perkins, Assistant Vice President and Director of Admissions from Miami University. And last but certainly not least, Carr Ramsey, Senior Vice President of Enrollment of Undergraduate Admissions from High Point University. Thank you and welcome today to our panelists. I'm going to set the stage a little bit with some of the current stats on the enrollment declines and what the forecasts are looking ahead. Predictions estimate up to a 15% decline in college enrollments after 2025 as a result of lower birth rates during the 2008 financial crisis. Now we know the economy has rebounded, but birth rates have not. Here we can see the trends. Things had continued to increase, and then again here looking at that 2025 mark continuing to decline. The Northeast is expected to experience the largest contraction in high school student populations, which is also where we have the biggest population of colleges. Looking at forecasted growth and decline in college-going students from 2012 to 2029, you can see here the areas highest impacted here in the light blue color, shifting all the way to the coral colors where we do see, fortunately, some growth in states like Florida and Texas, which I know many of you are starting to recruit students from those areas. That's all of these looking at what our pre-pandemic forecasts were. We have another challenge that you are all dealing with day to day over the last couple of years. We had 938,000 fewer high school students enrolled in college between 2019 and 2022. Another 1.2 million students dropped out of high school last year, further exacerbating these declines. The projected impact of these increased dropout and delayed college plans, here you can see in this blue area, this is a chart from EAB, that range of likely outcomes in terms of the decline has significantly grown. The dotted line here looking at what the initial forecasts were with the decrease in birth rates and overall what the expected outcomes are now. Now, with looking at that as our stage, I'm going to go ahead and start asking questions of our panelists because that's why you're here today. So, starting off with Carr at High Point, let's talk about how are you addressing these current enrollment fluctuations caused by the pandemic, and how are you building those learnings into your 2025 plans?
A warm-up silently. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today. I really appreciate this and appreciate the opportunity to speak on this topic. It's one that I'm pretty passionate about because I think the discourse around it is mostly wrong at the moment. And there are many things that we do as an industry to promote college growth, to promote college going, and to promote successful outcomes for students. But one of the things that hurts us a lot is speaking of higher education as monolithic, right? The big C, college. And that's very much not the case. That's especially not the case for the most recent enrollment demographic reports. When we look at 900,000 student decline, this is happening primarily in a couple of pieces of higher education. It's happening among proprietary schools, and it's happening primarily in two-year institutions. Two-year institutions play an important role in American higher education. They are critical to future success for many Americans. but they're one portion of higher education, and we can't speak of this as a decline for everyone. We haven't all felt this. And we're also seeing simultaneously enrollment growth in the last 2 years among the most selective institutions in the country, among private four-year institutions, particularly within some regions. And right, we have to acknowledge that there are winners within this and folks who are losing students, and we need to speak about those two quite differently. So I am actually very optimistic about the future for us, in particular here at High Point. And we've been quite fortunate that we've been able to grow 5% a year each of the last 2 years throughout all of this.
Tom, what are you seeing at Rose-Hulman in terms of your growth and contraction?
Sure, I really appreciate Carr's comments. I was in my notes here, I had much of what he shared along with that. So I appreciate that take and that perspective. Like Carr, we actually enrolled our highest number of first-year students this fall and have kind of plateaued at where we want to be as an institution. But this has been in response to what we're seeing in changes with the marketplace. So we have been working very aggressively to think about diversifying our market and our outreach and where we want to position the institution in 5 and 10 years moving forward. So pushing away from having such a dependence on the Midwest enrollment numbers and becoming more of a national reach. But doing it based upon data of saying, where are those students that have historically been good fit to Rose-Hulman? We're very lucky in the fact that Rose, being a STEM institution, our mission really drives the type of activities and students and messaging that we push out. So looking at a national basis and saying, okay, where are and who are students similar to those who've enrolled in the past, but outside of this Midwest and more on a national level, has allowed us to grow in a way that I think will, in 5, 10 years and longer, really protect the institution. Along with that, I would say we've worked hard because of the fact of saying, okay, we want to make sure that the students we reach out to, we have to communicate who we are as an institution. We've really worked diligently to sharpen our message, to explain to students who we want to attract and who we want to enroll, and who are the best fit students, all in the context of focusing on student success, so that when we enroll students, we know they're coming into a right fit and they'll be able to achieve their long-term personal, professional goals, and seeing enrollment enhancements through better retention at the same time.
Ensuring that students really find the best fit and stay. Bethany, another thing that I hear often with regards to the Cliff is really reaching out to more non-traditional students and helping also those non-traditional students find their fit and provide the resources throughout their journey. What role do non-traditional students play in your enrollment plans?
I think this is such a great question because many of us are probably grappling with what that might mean and how it aligns with or doesn't align with the mission or ethos or just current makeup of our student bodies on our campuses. In the past 18 months at Miami, we've launched new graduate and certificate programs primarily online. And I now oversee a graduate admission team that once resided in the graduate school and was more operational and support focused, and is now much more recruitment and student support focused in the Office of Admission. And I think as we've made those shifts, we've had to be really careful about staying realistic. I was at Southern New Hampshire University when the recession hit, and I was able to experience how much it took to grow to be what SNHU is today for an online institution. That ship has sailed, and so for those of us exploring online options, graduate programs, I think it's important to think about leaning into our strengths. So Miami's not trying to be everything to everybody. We're leaning into having a great business school and fantastic business programs, emerging tech and business and design expertise on our campus and those programs. So we're investing heavily and carefully, but in targeted areas, and really starting with our alumni and those who have affinity with the university. So I think that's important. And I think with transfer students as well, we have obviously seen a decline of students coming from our feeders that we'll see over the next couple of years. So we've had to really relook at our entire transfer process and how we're serving students. And so we looked at the 3 C's, right? So the cost of attendance, and how are my credits going to transfer? And then how long is it going to take me to complete the degree? What's important to me as a transfer student? And where does Miami win? And let's lean into our strengths while at the same time saying, okay, let's lean in here. And we've got to fix some of the things that aren't serving transfer students well moving forward. So those are a couple of the things that we've done, as well as just trying to upskill our alumni and keep them engaged as lifelong learners. And it's been a lot more fun than I thought it would be to learn as much as I have about non-traditional students in the past year.
Really succinctly clarifies what they're looking for. Car, how have transfer students played into your growth, talking about that 5% growth year over year?
Yeah, I want to back up, and there was something really important, right? Lean into your strengths. And the first step in doing that is actually being self-aware enough as an institution to truly understand what your strengths are. And this is something, again, I think we struggle with as across the board in higher education. We are in this work because we care deeply about students and their outcomes, and we want to try and help everyone. The reality is not every institution can work with every type of student, not effectively, and not in a way that allows for differentiation and institutional growth. In 2005, High Point University had about 1,400 traditional undergraduate students and about 1,400 non-traditional students. And we made a decision at that time to focus on a traditional undergraduate population. We closed our satellite campuses. We ended our evening degree program. We moved away from something that's at that point should have been growing or could have been growing, to be able to focus on what we thought we could do best and what we thought we could do differently and better than anyone else. And with that, we've now grown to 6,000 total students as a university. We've done it in an incredibly successful way. We've been able to add programs we never could have done before in the situation with that sort of split population. And it took a little risk, but we said, this is what we can do. This is what we can do really well, and we're going to do that. So non-traditional students play a very limited role in our undergraduate population now. Transfer students certainly do, and they are playing a growing role, particularly as we become more selective for our first-year student population, and as we continue to add programs like nursing that lend itself to some transfer students coming in for those professional phases of upper division programs. Like Miami, we've added more online flexible programming at the graduate and professional level, particularly for later career or terminal degrees within healthcare and other areas where it makes sense to add additional flexibility. But we didn't think at that time, and still don't, that, right, as you mentioned, Southern New Hampshire does online really well. Liberty does online really well. Arizona State does online really well. That market has big players in it, and it is a commodity market, right? You're competing on volume and price. So that's not the way we choose to compete. We offer a traditional undergraduate experience unlike anyone else, and it's working for us.
Are so critical. Enrollment has so many impacts, from capital projects to course modalities, to what academic programs you're offering. It has more than just who you get in the door ramifications. That's so critical. Are there any other adjustments you're making at High Point to really prepare for these shifting demographics?
We fully believe that there is great opportunity for us to grow, right, not shrink. When we look at these demographic changes, and even in the chart you showed, right, there is growth happening over the next 5 years, not constriction. And if we look at from right now, projecting out to 2037, it's only a 7% decline in the college-bound population across the country. And that's from WICHE data, which is, it's the best we've got, but it's notoriously, wrong. I mean, even the 2016 WICHE report was off by 8% for the 2017 class. It was, that class was 8% larger than WICHE projected. So, we're not totally convinced that there is any cliff coming. And we're gonna continue to grow and continue to offer education that we believe is different and unique, and is the type of higher education that prospective students desire and want. And so we're growing. We are about to break ground on a new library. We're about to break ground on a new 300-bed residence hall. We're about to break ground on a dental school, a law school, a new school of nursing. We're not slowing down. We see this as an opportunity for incredible growth. And overall, we're still looking at worst case scenario, 3.5 million potential college-bound students. I'm looking for 1,500 a year. There are 1,500 out there out of 3.5 million. If you're willing to give them something that, they need and want. So we're positioning for the future, not the past, and a future that involves continued growth and evolution.
We have a poll looking at our audience, and right now it's showing most of the audience is concerned but cautiously optimistic, and I think that optimism that Carr shared is critical. Bethany, is this similar to what you're experiencing?
I wouldn't say I am as optimistic, but it's pretty close, and I think that has to do with you've got to lean in. We can't retrench. We can't slow down, and as you said earlier, Carr, there will be winners and there will be those who lose students. I think that's what I'm pretty realistic about. I don't think everyone's going to grow. I don't think every institution is going to be successful managing the cliff. And so in doing so, we are leaning into what's relevant. We have to continue to be relevant to our students. And that's not just in programming, but it's also in facilities. We're also breaking ground on a clinical health sciences building. There's a data sciences building that we have going up. And our Center for Entrepreneurship, we're leaning into even more. And all three of these, it's how are they going to serve students in multiple majors across different academic divisions? And how are we preparing students for jobs that don't exist yet, and for the multiple career changes we're all used to talking to students about, but that they are going to have to lead through and perhaps even freelance or have their own business through at higher rates than we've seen in the past. So we're leaning into relevant programs and facilities for our students in that way, but also recognizing that this is a very price sensitive generation. And we are having conversations about our price, about net price, about how scary our sticker price is much earlier in the application cycle. So we are looking at our pricing and our aid strategy and going through it with a finer tooth comb than I think we have in the past few years. We've made it through the past 2 years of the pandemic, and now we're really carefully looking at what the next 5 to 10 years looks like, ready to make adjustments in a really competitive market. Because we are in the Midwest, and we know that that's a really challenging environment to be in right now. And then lastly, I would say we are developing pipelines or continuing to lean into those. We think that this is just as much about access, getting students excited about going to college and the compelling value of going to college, as it is about engaging students with Miami earlier in the process. So their freshman year, they might be coming to our Day of Champions, where we treat them to lunch and they get a short information session and tour, and we take them to a basketball game. But it leads into when they come to that summer camp academic experience, which leads into that Bridges program scholarship experience in their fall, in the fall of their senior year, so that we're really kind of stair-stepping them into getting excited about college and what that is about. For those populations that might not end up with us or be college going historically, because they will be taking up a higher percentage of our population a couple years from now.
Engaging students earlier is certainly a trend we're hearing more and more from. Something that you both touched on was really leaning into what students are looking for and having that competitive advantage. Overall, we're seeing students as consumers, really their expectations continuing to rise. Karen, is this at all changing the way you engage with prospective students?
Good morning from Colorado. So what I would say is that certainly the space that we're in, because I think the cliff is very proportional or not proportional to your institution. So I really appreciate what my colleagues have said about none of us are monoliths, and the whole issue of demographics and access and other things. And so we're in a small liberal arts college space, which in some ways is one of the hardest to talk to families about. What is it that you get if you major in classics, for instance, right? As well as if you major in business, right? And so really trying to make the case for the liberal arts education, for the flexibility in the way in which you're a nimble, agile sort of learner when you're on campus, and then after you leave. I think we've long been known as a place for 52 years that has had a block plan, a one course at a time approach, which is, I think, really been a very consistent message for us over the years. I think we felt that as there were interruptions during the pandemic, so if you think of spring 2020 as a moment in time when we all had to vacate our campuses, students had already gotten through 6 of their 8 classes because they were doing them one at a time. So it wasn't trying to juggle an entire spring semester and figure out how to do it online, but feeling like they had finished the 6 classes that they had already engaged in and only had 2 more to go. So I think that's a really interesting spot in a world that keeps changing and in a world where there are fewer sort of certain answers. And yet I think even if you might put us in the halves with 11,000 applications and a 14% admit rate, I think we're still struggling to understand what this is all going to mean for us. And the issue of expense, the issue of what it costs to go to a highly residential private institution, it's enormous, right? And so I really appreciate what's been said about transparency around aid, helping families understand. One place, one of the things that's distinctive about our location in this conversation is the Rocky Mountain West isn't doing badly when it comes to numbers. And yet it is very hard for us to attract Colorado students, for instance, in the numbers that we'd like to, because we are in a state where we are I think wonderful, but a unicorn nonetheless. There are no small liberal arts colleges, and we attract students from all over the US and all over the world, right? And so trying to think about ways, and so we built a program in 2019 called the Colorado Pledge, where we try to be very transparent about what it would cost to come to CC as a Coloradan, and where your income, if you have income and typical assets in this range, here's what you can expect. If you have this kind of income and typical assets, here's what you can expect. What's really interesting about some of those programs, whether they're regional or national, is often you're not spending more aid dollars, because a family with less than $60,000, if you're a meet 100% of need institution, you're going to put a lot of resources toward that family, regardless of where they're from. But it's really helping families understand, here's what we can offer in terms of resources and opportunities, and how we will educate someone to be a really, sort of wonderful contributor to society in many, many diverse ways. And here's what it will cost you really sort of upfront. So I think that those conversations have led us where we hoped they would, which is that we're seeing more Coloradans in the applicant pool, and that we're really thinking about is that could this be a program that would be national, right? And so it's a really interesting process. Again, also appreciate what's been said about thinking about your strengths, who you are, who you aren't, and sort of moving from that space to make really careful and thoughtful decisions. We're not in a position to grow. We don't have a goal to grow, but we really want to shape. And I think bringing in the students that we think will most benefit from what we have and will most contribute to things that we're going to do. But I will also say, I hope we'll help each other in this cliff, right? Not only help students for whom access is limited, but, for instance, I have some data on Colorado, which looks like a not so bad state when it comes to where numbers are headed. But if anyone's interested in recruiting Colorado, I will tell you which 7 counties to focus on and the rest that you should just completely avoid, so that we're good at sort of sharing data and then taking that data, to Car's point, and not just applying it to everybody in the same way, but sort of saying, okay, I'm new to this area, or I'm new to this territory, or I want to see what we can do to sort of maximize our opportunities here, leverage channels that we haven't before. Let's all use each other, because I think there's some really good resources and facts and thoughts and ways to navigate this.
I love that sentiment, really sharing the resources you have and the data you have across the field to help everyone succeed, because the goal is to get more students into college, right, and graduate and succeed. Tom, is this something you guys are also leaning into?
In the recruitment, I always think about teaching a college class. If as a professor you would come in every day and just lecture, you realize you're going to lose the interest, the connection, most of the class after a certain point in time. But if you come in and you do field trips and small group projects and films, it really, I guess, try and think about the multitudes of ways of reaching individuals in that classroom based upon the way that they learn, and then apply that to college recruitment, especially nowadays. That's really the direction we need to move. So what we have been doing here at Rose is thinking about the fact that we have to get to students who have STEM interest at an early point and giving them the opportunities for engagement with this. So our pre-college programs start right after the 9th grade of high school, where students can come on campus and spend time in our labs with our faculty, with our students, exploring their passion, science, math, engineering. And they can do that here, or they can also, we're giving them opportunities to do it online. But along the way, we want to give them something in return, so they can start earning college credit that they can have here, or they can take with them, or to build a more competitive application for other schools. So that idea of let's start engaging with students while they're in high school, building their affinity for STEM and for Rose is really important to us. And then we're thinking about, okay, how do students want to receive information, and how do we present that to them at the point where they have the most interest? So thinking about, some students want to have a chat with a faculty member. Maybe it's from their academic area of interest, or maybe it's from someone from our rocket team. So we're doing quite a few chats, Tuesdays and Thursday nights, online chats for an hour. Students can just come in, post questions, and talk with the community here at Rose. And our participation in that has been really excelling. And I think it's because, again, a lot of it's based on the fact that we're trying to address multiple interests, but allowing our audience to talk with those who are most involved with that. Of course, we continue to host visits on campus. Those have looked different than they have in past years. But during COVID, just allowing people to at least get here and walk the campus and see the buildings, and having that chance to get the feel and the presence has still been very, very important for us. The other thing that I find is really important for us is the use of social media. but making sure that we have the right individuals communicating out in social media. So to me, I'm lost in much of that space, but we have interns and students and others who have a better connectivity of how to communicate, how to connect, and what to demonstrate and what to present. So thinking again, who's our audience, how do they want to connect? And then finally building those social communities out there on the internet too, where our students, where we have to step back, but create a space for them to engage in conversations and build that sense of relationships and connectivity to one another. So again, I just think of this as like teaching a class, knowing that in my classroom, I have multiple learners who have different styles of taking in information, processing, and learning. I have to use that same approach to how we recruit and reach out to our prospective audiences. We have to employ more methods than ever before and be good at every one of those. So it puts more responsibility on us, but I'm looking for that touch point when it clicks with that individual who we turn their head and say, oh, I hear what they say, and that resonates with me.
Audience much earlier in the process, whether through these on-campus programs or just more broadly educating students through the admissions process, not just here's your application, yes or no, but how can we educate you through the entire step, whether you're going to our institution or not. Something that Karen said that I wanted to circle back to, being in Colorado, where there is still growth, Car. I know you're also in an area that tend to be growing in high school student population. Car, how are you addressing having that increased competition from schools further away, targeting students where you often had a lot of success with?
I wouldn't say there's correlation between our location and where we're competing for students. And part of this is we've been intentional about having a strategy that is not too dependent on any single part of the country. And as we think about challenges, competition, I personally love it. I thrive on competition my whole life. It's what's helped make me get better, competition with myself and with other people. And I think students do benefit when there's more competition among schools. I'll come back to that in a moment. But I think what we've seen, particularly most recently with Excelsior in New York, historically with Hope in Georgia and Tennessee, with Bright Futures in Florida, right? These state programs actually can have a bigger impact on student exports than any demographic changes happening over time, because they can be quite quick. We saw it here in North Carolina with North Carolina Promise. There are 3 institutions, now 4 in the state, where in-state students can attend for $500 a semester, a 4-year public institution. That is, if we're competing with those institutions for students, much more significant than all of our colleagues from every other college in the country spending more time in North Carolina. So there are things to pay attention to beyond competition. Coming back to competition being good for students, higher education, as we see from the rising discount rates, particularly at private institutions, has largely chosen, for many good reasons, to compete on price. And that has been good for students in terms of their cost of education. However, I don't think it's been good for students in terms of the resources they have on those campuses once they arrive. And by competing on price, we haven't, across higher education, done enough to compete on differentiation and being able to focus on who are the students we serve and how do we do that best. And the more institutions are intentional about finding that student, whether it be in a particular academic space, STEM, in a particular interest space or personality or demographic, the better we can do in educating those students, And the less this competition matters, because we're not actually competing for the same students. We're competing for a very specific type of student against a much more finite group of institutions. And if we're inspired by the competition to be more intentional about who we are, everyone stands to win. It's harder to do, it's harder to articulate, it's maybe harder to get students to come along at first, but the momentum builds and the benefit to students and the institutions only amplifies over time. So I think competition is great. I love it and enjoy working with and against peers at other institutions, and look forward to continued growth in competition in North Carolina. It's lovely. We have beaches, we have mountains. Try and take them away. They don't want to go anywhere. Everyone's coming here.
It's great. It's something that we're hearing again and again as we talk. It's really about helping students find that perfect fit with an institution and celebrating the unique attributes of your campus, and really narrowing in from a marketing perspective. I know can certainly be a challenge to really distill down what your differentiators are. You touched there on really that geographic reach and ensuring that your plans built out for across the country. The other big shift is looking at these 2025 enrollment projections. Future years will be more diverse, and that's one of the positive things to come out, certainly driven by growing populations of Hispanic and multiracial high school students. Karen, how are you preparing to recruit a more diverse class?
Yeah, such a great question, and I think so important to think about. So, we're in a region of the country with a lot of Hispanic serving institutions. And so that means a particular percentage of students who would identify as Latinx, and programs and resources that are dedicated in that way. So certainly that is one direction that we've seen sort of quite successfully, not for Colorado College in particular, but certainly something we look at and think, could this be the way to think about how you target sort of what you do? I like to think about some of this, and there's so many directions to go in this, but I think some of this is that expression, not just talking the talk, but walking the talk. And so when we think about what diversity looks like on our campuses, are we having really clear and honest conversations with prospective students, with our community-based organization partners? Whether you're like us and you're in Questbridge, or you're working with particular community-based organizations, or you're, in a position to really talk about what contributions a student will make on campus. Like many institutions, we have an anti-racism implementation plan and a committee, and that all sounds really wonderful to a prospective student, but they are expecting, much like we've heard, that this transparency around what does that actually mean? What does it actually mean? How do I experience this as a student? How does a faculty member bring this into the curriculum? What are ways in which we're really thinking about these particular resources? I think the test optional landscape for many of us who either moved in that direction because of the pandemic or had moved there before and intend to stay or intend to go back, I think there's a lot of intersectionality there when it comes to race and to identities and to access, and how we build early pipelines, how we work with students on identifying where the challenges are. Last night I was in a Zoom with we have a counselor advisory board, so school counselors and community-based organizations from around the country. And one of the things they were saying is they are feeling like their students are very underprepared in a way that they weren't 3 years ago, because of all the interruptions, because of all the challenges of COVID. And even in highly resourced independent schools, there still is this sense, for instance, that students are struggling with writing. We know when we look at sort of our data around how students are doing, often is in STEM, that students are really struggling. Conversations like in Inside Higher Ed about, is calculus really what you need, right? And some of those have impacts across ethnic and racial identities, but I think particularly when you're talking about under-resourced communities, or you're talking about traditionally students who have been underrepresented in higher education, I think those are all the sort of challenges that we're thinking about. And on the recruitment side, I think there's nothing better than keeping it real. Like, again, I'm too old for keeping it real, but keeping it real and keeping it authentic and delivering a message that's consistent with what our students see. If we have a fly-in or we have some way of engaging with particular populations, that they're seeing all of the successes that our institutions have had and all of the ways that we need to continue to grow in this incredibly important work.
That authenticity piece is so critical, as is bringing CBOs into the conversation so they can really support their students through the process. I know this is something at Scoir that we're certainly investing in more. Tom, how is that going as Rose-Hulman Thinking, being a STEM-focused institution? Is that a challenge?
I think a great way to carry on conversation, because what we have decided to do in this case is we've identified a select number of CBOs and also high schools that serve very diverse, historically underrepresented populations of students who've come into the STEM field. And what we are doing, trying to take a little bit of a different approach by putting our counselor in their space. So going out to the schools themselves at an early point and having this individual talk first about STEM careers, STEM opportunities, and right fit institutions. So not necessarily beginning with come to Rose, but come into the STEM field and talk about what it is in terms of getting prepared for the rigor of such an education. So we're coming to these organizations, the high schools, the CBOs, and saying we want to come in as an additional support for your students, because our number one goal is to encourage students who again have historically been underrepresented to pursue a STEM career. And it's our belief through these arrangements, and in fact, one of the things that we did as we built these is we've provided each of these groups an MOU and asked them to sign this to hold us accountable with our task. And saying that as we reach a broader audience, as we reach more students and encourage their pursuit, there'll be a select number who say, Rose is the right fit institution for us. So we want to be seen as a partner for the encouragement for students to pursue STEM. And then as we share information, getting students who say early, who have preparation, who have that, really strong, that passion for the STEM area, then to get them on campus and building affinity and best fit. So when they come to campus as a first year student, they've already been here. They already have a sense of awareness and comfort in our space so that they can have that long-term success. But again, building it a little bit different, we're saying we're going to identify a select number of CBOs and schools that we can have a presence in and then promote STEM on a general level, and then find through that funnel those who are going to be best fit and get them better assimilated into the institution and support during the 4 years of their enrollment here. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking with this, and asking those organizations to hold us accountable as we move through the process.
Agreement to hold you accountable. I love that. Bethany, how are you handling this at Miami University?
We have similar partnerships and pipelines, so I won't go into some of the things that I think have been just touched on so well. But I'll add two things, and I think it's just so important to have regionally based staff in some areas, if possible, because we're there. We're present when the CBO is hosting a program. We're there when the high school has a panel presentation or a families night, and we can be there as experts and partners about the overall college experience, not just to represent Miami. And I think that is so important. We've benefited from that physical presence for several years. And I think lastly, I'm going to share two things. I lied. Two things. So one, I think staffing is so important. If our staff doesn't look like the diversity that our students are looking for, then we've already started off with a challenge. So that's something that I lose sleep over, is just the makeup of our staff and what we're saying to students and what we're showing them. And I think that's That's something really, really important. We've had to fail searches. We've been intentional about changing job descriptions to prefer speaking multiple language. These are things that maybe didn't carry as much weight 10 years ago. And lastly, I think this is something that's been fun because it's so Miami. We say welcome to the Miami family all the time, and it is a family affair. We have lots of students who come because their parents came and their grandparents came, and they just have such a strong affinity with Miami. But for some cultures, the decision about where to go to college is such a family affair. It's a family conversation. It's a family challenge and decision. So we've been really intentional about how are we speaking to the parents and family members, and what places are more than just the students going to be, where we can have a conversation with all who will be very critical in that decision about going out to the Midwest, to Miami, to go to college, and that's been the real push for us with out of state, knowing that our pipeline programs have really been successful in state.
Was staffing, and higher ed was already experiencing all of this contraction and this stress with staffing at the start of the pandemic, but now we have what's coined as the Great Resignation, great marketing term, looking at really these staff are looking for a better experience just as the students are. How are you addressing your staffing if you're experiencing contraction now? If not, really, how are you building in opportunities to really make sure your staff continue to be engaged and inspired by this admissions process?
Some contraction as we went into this fall. So I think we kept some staff members who stayed because we were in a pandemic, right? Who said, I'll lay low and then figure out what my next move is once we start to come out of this. And then of course we had staff who by the end of the 2 years that we just went through were completely and totally burnout. And I lost all but one staff member to other industries, not to other admission offices. And it's a sign that we went through a hard couple of years as an industry and as admission professionals in general. And a couple of the things that we're doing, we've said this in meetings, it is still about the right people in the right roles. We cannot be so focused on filling vacancies that we just get a body in a seat. We have to have the right people in the right roles to stay true to who we are and to serving students well. So we've had to fail some searches, even though we absolutely would have benefited from having a full staff. And I've really had to think about how do we take care of the people who have stayed, just as much as we rethink the vacancies that we do have. So I think we've seen just as many promotions and raises as we have vacancies and resignations that we've needed to fill. For our regional positions, we had to go back to the drawing board. And after having done market adjustments, I think in 2019, we had to do them all over again because we were already not meeting the standards of certain regions with our salary ranges, and we weren't attracting employees. So we've had to do market adjustments for a lot of our positions in large metro areas, and that's cost us, right? So I think I'm actually down at least one FTE because we've had to make adjustments to keep or attract employees with the salary that they expect. And of course, we're looking at flexible work and remote work opportunities, but very carefully. We are a face-to-face, traditional, immersive college experience, and we will not compromise that. So how do we serve our students within that mission while also giving employees some of the flexibility that they're looking for? So these are the conversations I'm sure you're all having elsewhere, but it's been really, really challenging. but rewarding when we get it right.
I'll open that up to the rest of the panelists. Is this something you're also experiencing, and how is your institution navigating that?
At other schools is not just the great resignation that they've been experiencing, but the pressure that they're also feeling in their offices to take on additional responsibilities, to expand grad programs, to outreach to new markets, to do more with less staff. And hearing so many of my peers just saying, we have vacancies we can't fill, the expectations are increasing, and I'm up to here as well as everyone else. And thinking through all this, your heart goes out for them. And I don't know what the answer is because of the concern that every institution has in this terms of the coming cliff, the price competition, the schools trying to think about diversifying their markets. And so much of this relies right back on our office here. How do we deal with all this growing expectation, a constrained workforce, trying to keep everyone healthy and in a good work mood? This is really, it's an expanding issue that I think we're going to confront as an industry for many, many years. And I don't have a great answer. We've tried to become lean and mean here at Rose, fewer staff, higher paid, diversify, double train, make sure that if we lose someone, I have someone who can step right up as a backup. But I don't know if there's a great answer at this moment in time. But I do hear my peers saying they're feeling it, and they're feeling it very, very hard at the moment.
On the staff side, we have the fatigue on the student side. Are any of you rethinking your admissions process or how you're navigating the recruitment process to try to address both the student experience, but also the staff on the other side of the table?
If we're not doing that every single year, we're doing ourselves and our institutions a disservice, regardless of the conditions around us. Not rethinking what we're doing is one of the quickest ways to start shrinking as institutions, because we can't repeat the same things over and over again. Even if it worked for decades previously, the world is changing and moving too quickly. Students talk about student expectations. Everything is urgent, and everything can be done with 2 thumbs, maybe 1, and that's it, right? In terms of interacting with a screen. This is the world, and we are in a service industry, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. Not because our prospective students are customers, but because we're in a people industry. And our families want to come visit institutions when they can, which is not usually 9 to 5 during the week, because the students we want are in school and are busy with activities. So we have to be available when they can, when they are. So how do we make adjustments that allow that to happen? How do we make adjustments that are, yes, more efficient, but are in the student's best interest, and then in the best interest of the institutions that we work for? Because ultimately, everyone, I think, on this call gets a paycheck from a single institution to help manage enrollment, and that's our job to do that. And so we've got to be thoughtful about how we're doing that too. For staff, a huge thing. There is nothing that can torpedo a year faster than losing all of our staff, or staff not being engaged, staff not enjoying their work. And for me, it's about making sure they feel supported with resources, emotionally supported in training, that they have the autonomy to go and manage their territories, to do their work, and that they truly understand the purpose of what we're doing. Hearing our student stories time and time again, hearing the experiences of our prospective families as they interact with us, the things that matter to them, the things they're celebrating. And sure, we have turnover, and this year it's been similar to in years past. But as long as we continue to invest in people, balance support and expectations, right? Both high expectations, but high levels of support, will keep more than we lose.
Meeting about leading with the heart and ending with the mind as we go into difficult moments. For us, this was in the context of finishing the class and having very few spaces and even less financial aid left and having to make some really tough decisions over the next couple of weeks. But I also think about this as, could we, that heart and mind metaphor, could we extend that to the students we're working with, right? So we always tell them, be themselves. I think that's one of the hardest things that you have to say to a student is, oh, don't worry about the essay, write about yourself, be yourself. What does be yourself mean, right? What does be yourself mean when no one's asked you to really, no one's really interrogated that with you, right? So I think those are some of the things that we talk about. And I right now feel like we've had a ton of staff turnover, a ton of transitions. I love the idea of not just plugging holes that Bethany talked about, but being really thoughtful about who you need and where. I also think that there's a way in which we are trying to lower the anxiety level in the population that we're working with, particularly those students that are most vulnerable in this process. And yet I want my team to feel like I'm giving them opportunities to lower the anxiety level so they can be good models. We all know there's things we say and then there's things that we do, and the messages are equally strong whether we've said them directly or behaved in a particular way. That's true for parenting, that's true for managing, right? That what we say and what we do need to be consistent, and that people are watching what we do. So I also think that starts with reasonable expectations. Car is absolutely right. We have huge demands, huge expectations. We are absolutely in that place where there are demands from other parts of campus. We've been asked to, as a relatively small department, jump into COVID protocols. Can you email current students and make sure that they've done their required testing? Okay, we know how to do that, right? But so I think really trying to walk that talk around how we're balanced as leadership and what we're doing to help our teams and how we're helping them feel like this work is mission-driven, heart-centered, and yet there are some real realities that are on kind of the mind side of things. I will say I have a team right now that loves cornhole, so that seems to be one of those activities that you can do at lunchtime outside in most weather. And then I'm going to just send out the warning to Bethany that the CC Tigers are playing the Miami Red Hawks at Colorado College this Friday and Saturday, and the admission staff will be rooting loudly for the Tigers, except that I have a Miami of Ohio staff member. So we're all assembling our black and gold for Colorado College and our red for Miami of Ohio, because our colleague she's just truly amazing. And so we all love her. So I'm trying to incorporate just that sheer fun. Like, I think high school students are missing sheer fun. We missed a lot of sheer fun when we were all locked in our houses, but remembering that the work we do is very purposeful and mission driven, and that we're all trying to do it sort of together as a team. It's so simple in a way, but I don't know if it's going to work ultimately, because I worry about our folks in tech spaces and analytic spaces and data analysis spaces on our teams who leave for jobs that pay not just a little more, but twice as much or 3 times as much, and how we retain particular specific skills and talents as well. So, but go Red Hawks and go Tigers. I just have to say it.
We're really investing here at Scoir is how do we find the best fit for these students, and how do we reduce the administrative burden across the board so everyone has that heart-centered experience. I want to thank our audience today for joining. We are right at time. This recording will be sent out later today, and thank you to all of our wonderful panelists for your insights today.